start is at the beginning. And this whole art form kind of started out with just a signature, people taking tags with signatures, signing their names with signatures. And over the course of a few years, this evolved into bigger things, which became what we know as masterpieces today, or in slang, just pieces, but it started out masterpiece. Then it just left the master alone and had the piece part. So as the signatures got bigger and bigger, I think different people in this, and I want to call it a game because I look at it as a game. It's an art form that has no other equal, because to do this art, you're a criminal. So, like the things that go along with being a criminal go along with this art form. So, a lot of people look at it as an art form and compare it to other artists, such as art school artists or art teachers or professors and things like that. But there are other things involved in this particular genre that are, I think, that's separated from others. And one of those is probably violence. Like, because it's a criminal world, you got to be able to defend yourself or get in and get out without. You're watching out for police, and you're also watching out for other writers, and becoming somebody known and trying to get your name out there. You also have rivals, and there are crews. So a lot of people don't go just single by themselves. They go with a whole crew of people. And I think the basic mentality of that crew mentality is anybody you meet is an enemy. Anywhere, anytime, any place. Any cop, any worker, any writer is an enemy until they prove themselves otherwise. So with that mentality, I think I just wanted to get that across at first so you can understand the difference of this art form as opposed to other art forms, and that there is a difference. Now, everybody that does this has a different take on what they want to do with it and where they want to go. Some people just want to bomb, just want to write their name and see how much they can write it and have it everywhere. They want the name to be everywhere, where any street you walk down, it's everywhere. And other people have other ideas about it. They just want to do whole cards, cover as much space as possible. And then there are people that I guess I represent, which are the guys who have taken it to another level or try to take it to another level, which generally speaking, people call it wild style or burner style, which is a style for writers that alienates pretty much everybody else because it's written in a style that's intentionally made indecipherable to regular people that don't write. And the more indecipherable you can make it, and also copyright a style to it, that's the whole goal of it, beyond just getting over and not getting arrested and not getting jumped and those things. So what I did today was, instead of just giving you a history lesson, I picked out slides of personal friends of mine, people that I've painted with, and influence of mine from the last 30 years. And before I show you my stuff, I want to show you some of the stuff that inspired me, or what you're going to see is just a fraction. Because there's, I would say, hundreds of thousands of pieces that have been done in New York over the last 30 years or so. And I just want to show you some good stuff. And then I'll show you some of mine, and then you can ask me questions after we finish. And I'll try to get through it quick because I know it's Friday and everybody wants to get out of here. So, good. Am I hooked up? Yeah. Let me see what I got. Like I said, in the beginning, people just started off with signatures, like what you see on the left there. And gradually, those signatures got bigger and bigger. And people practiced and generally got inspired by other writers. Now, with wild style, somehow there became like a secret society of writers that wanted, the way I look at it, that wanted to just speak to other writers and push the limits of what could be done with a spray can. Now, there were a lot of crews from all over the city, some from Brooklyn, some from Manhattan, some from the Bronx, all trying to put out enough pieces to change the aesthetic. If you could do it enough, it seems like the aesthetic would change over the course of years, maybe with the next generation of writers. This is phase 2. This is a phase 2 piece from 1974. Phase 2, in my opinion, is the most important writer that has ever lived. And the reason I say that is because he was an early writer that took the notion of doing a piece, doing your name differently every time. When writing first started and people first started doing pieces, you would just get a simple style that said your name and do that kind of style over and over again and just change the colors up in it. But Faze had another idea. He came out and just started trying to write his name big and make it indecipherable to people and change it every time he did it. Put arrows, loops, curves, you know, and just other things people weren't doing. So this kind of caught on to a certain degree, and other people started doing it. It's a G-Man piece. During the early 70s, late 70s, early 80s, the trains were so painted on and messed up that they started a thing called the buff. Well, it was in the mid-70s actually, where they cleaned the trains. Before that, the trains would run for years. They didn't have any system to clean them because this is a brand new art that never existed. So what you see there is a piece that's been done on top of a train that's been cleaned with acid a few times, and it totally strips the paint off. And so this has had many pieces on it, and it's been stripped down, and it's a chemical process, and it's called a buff. And a lot of writers consider it sort of like a holy war to go against the buff, to see if they can beat the buff. Like, because the buff, well, now it works, they clean the trains every day. So, but there are still kids that come from Europe, and you know, there's still kids in New York that write on the trains, even though they get buffed a few hours later, just to get the picture to go back home and say they did it. I went to New York, I did a piece on a train in New York, and I got the picture. And that's the war against the city, the buff against writers. This is another Faze piece from 1974. You can see it looks pretty primitive by today's standards, but you got to remember, in 1974 there were no pictures, videos, magazines, no media exposure at all. This was totally underground, only word of mouth and standing on train platforms. Most writers didn't know each other. You know, it was a mystery. It was even a mystery of how to do it. I remember as a kid, you know, I look at it, it was just starting when I was about 10 years old, and I look at it and I couldn't understand how somebody could do this. How did they do that? Did they run along down the platform and do it? Or, you know, I couldn't, you know, it got so big that I just couldn't understand how you were doing this, how it was possible. But I soon found out. A bunch of my friends told me about the yards, and we started going at around 11 years old. And it just became an adventure. This is Faze 2, Wendy Faze 2 from 1974.
Wendy, that's a female writer, no?
Nope, it was a male writer named Wendell, and he went by the name Wendy. But good try. Okay, this is a Mace from 1980. You can see it's straight letters, but you also see the writers trying to mix colors, use a lot of colors, use a lot of design, cloud around the name, but the name is still simple. But the 3D, which is the black and white part on the bottom, behind the letters, is what we would call a burner style 3D. which is something just to make the name fancier, embellish it a little. This is a Corrado, little Corrado of Keith, who also wrote LK on the 6th, 1980. Both of these pieces are, I guess, yeah, the one on the bottom you would call a burner, but it's kind of, you know, antique style. You know, it's a beginning style of what would become wild style. This is a Spawn throw up quickie on a truck. Spawn is a writer from New York that chose to specialize in garbage trucks instead of the trains. You know, so he's a unique individual amongst writers. This is another Corrado piece, and Sade Corrado. This is Des. This is another one of my mentors from New York City. He also wrote Spade, and he's also a well-known DJ now. He goes by the name DJ K-Slay out of New York. That's Des. Yeah. And this was one of my mentors. I started writing in the early 70s, and I left it alone after 3 years and came back to it maybe 5 years later in the 80s. But during that time, while I had stopped, technology has changed a lot. You know, people were doing a lot of things, doing whole cars and mixing colors and doing characters, and it got really technical. And I was lost. I didn't know how to do any of these things. But when I came back to it, I met Des, and I met a lot of other writers that were at the top at the time. And I just started hanging out and going with them, and I learned pretty quick. This is Sem pen. He does Sem does what these are called blockbusters. Sem took these to a level where he was doing these all like 2 or 3 times a week, doing whole cars like this, and he was doing them backwards. That was his interpretation of what wild style is. Nobody could read it because it's backwards or it's upside down. Like he would do the whole cars upside down, so you couldn't read it in a conventional manner. This is a Mitch piece. It's just an M from a Mitch piece, but he was also one of the people doing these whole cars that just take up space. You know, it's simple, but it just takes up space. It's a Desism and Poor. It's a 3-yard, 1981. It's a Cecil piece, 1978. This is a T-Bag 170 and TMT. This is one of the most influential crews of the IRTs in the late 1970s, known for their wild style. This is Shane from TAT, 1980s. Shane was, or is known mostly as a character artist. He does the face at the ends of his name, sometimes in the middle, and he also just does whole cards with a lot of characters for other people if he comes along with his crew. You know? And these are all people from my crew. I used to be in TAT. I don't really put it up anymore, but Fat Joe, Tat's crew, all of those guys, those are the people I used to write with. This is another Corrado and Des, 5s, another Spawn on the truck. This is a Days top to bottom, a Days SR and Trap. Days SR and Des, old car from 1981. This is a Keith and Scheme. Scheme was also, Keith is Des and Scheme is Des's partner. They were 2 of the most prolific writers of the IRTs in the 1980s. That's another Spawn piece. That's Spawn sitting on a mailbox. This is Bio from TAT. A Shame and Bio car. This is Crusaders, a crew out of East Harlem, New York. This is another TMT car, K-Bot. This is T-Kid 170 out of New York City. Known around the world as one of the style masters out of New York, and he was also one of my, I can't say an inspiration, but I can say a rival that kept me on my toes, you know, like, and we had an ongoing, I guess, rivalry for many years, even though we didn't know each other personally. And I have a few of his pieces to show you, just to show different styles. All of these people, I think when you adopt a style, you're trying to show the world that your style is better, or your style is legitimate, or your style is good. And at another level, you're trying to rewrite the rules. And I think that's the level that I'm known for, I guess. You know, like just trying to take it to a really crazy level. This is a Dero piece. Dero is one of, I don't know, he's a friend of mine, and this is one of his first pieces, and this is one of his first attempts at style. He's also one of my proteges, too. This is Shame Bio, Shame Ken. Oh, you got a Raz Ken Shame up there, Bio, and a Ken Shame. These are all TAT crew out of New York. This is from about 1984. This is a Raz piece from 1983. This is Dez from 1981. It's a Dez Scheme Pour Whole Car on the 3 line, 1980. This is a Spawn truck. See shooting the NYPD sign on the machine. Positive message there. This is a Stingray piece by Park, 1981, in the Hall of Fame, East Harlem, New York. This is Dez, 1980. And this is a Phase 2 piece. I think this is around 1984. But now you see, Phase 2 was known as one of the style masters in the 70s. In the 80s, he re-upped his style to get even wilder, to change up. He completely changed it from what it was to invent a whole new style. And this is one of his newer styles. This is a Boss piece by Scheme from 1982. This, even though it's really dark, this is a Phase 2 piece off the Detroit Art Train from 1986. It was a train that was painted by writers from New York that traveled around the country to take art exhibits. Inside the train, they had art exhibits by famous artists that traveled all over the country, and they had writers from New York paint the outside of it. And this was one of the cars. And this is one of mine. This is a Savage by me, 1984. This is a Dez piece, 1982. This is a Lay's. Lay's started integrating characters, big characters, into his wild style pieces in the 80s and 90s, and this is one of his pieces from the 90s. Okay, here we got 3 whole cars. We got a T-Kid Booze up at the top. We got another T-Kid Booze in the middle, and we got another T-Kid Boozer and Ken at the bottom. Or Boozer, Booze, Ken, T-Kid at the bottom. This was the dominant style of the #1 line in the early 80s. And during his day, T-Kid was considered probably one of the best in New York, if not the best. This is one of my pieces from '93. A detail piece of it. This is the art train from Detroit in 1986 too. I also was chosen to do a car on there, and that's just a piece of it. This was in the Hall of Fame in East Harlem, New York in 1993. This is a piece called Roughneck Reality, which is about 18 feet high and about 75 feet long.